BBC One Scotland, Frontline Scotland reports on a medical disaster dating from the 1980s, which is still affecting hundreds of people. Eleanor Bradford tells a story of blood and tears.
Nearly every haemophiliac living in Scotland was infected with serious and deadly viruses by the end of the 1980s, infected through blood products given to them by the NHS.
I knew it was deadly. I knew enough to know it was going to kill me.
Hundreds of haemophiliacs and the families of those who've died want answers.
What actually went wrong? Did somebody cut corners? It was supposed to be the safest in Britain.
With new evidence, Frontline Scotland investigates whether enough was done to protect some of the most vulnerable patients. Robert Mackey has severe haemophilia. His blood lacks a vital element called factor VIII, which makes it clot. The condition's hereditary and has affected 10 of Robert's male relatives. He has lived with it since childhood.
It governs your life to a greater or lesser degree because of the risks of internal bleeding. But other than that, I would say I led quite a normal childhood.
As a child, John also took growing up with haemophilia in his stride. For this programme, he's chosen to hide his identity.
I was first diagnosed when I was about a year old after falling over and bleeding everywhere. My parents tried to, let me have a normal life as possible.
To begin with, John and Robert had to cope as best they could. The main treatment for them was cryoprecipitate, made from the blood of a handful of donors. But in the 1970s, a revolution occurred. Pure factor VIII was produced.
The media coverage at the time indicated that this was cutting-edge technology and it would enhance haemophiliacs' lives no end because of the effectiveness of the treatment.
For the first time, they could treat themselves at home, but there was a drawback. Each dose was made from the blood of thousands of donors, any one of whom could have a virus. Viruses like hepatitis. A new strain appeared in the late 70s, which would be later known as hepatitis C. Within years, research suggested it could cause liver problems. Did anyone tell you that this could carry more viruses than the treatments you'd had before?
Categorically not. I was told it was absolutely safe. Categorically.
Despite the emerging concerns, Robert and John were reassured there was nothing to worry about.
It was supposed to be the safest in Britain. To be told that the blood products you were injecting had more than a slight risk was never mentioned.
But a new deadly disease was appearing. Haemophiliacs who had taken factor VIII for years were becoming infected. In late 1984, Robert's consultant in Edinburgh, Dr. Christopher Ludlam, invited a group of his patients to a meeting in a lecture theatre.
He said, unfortunately, some patients have contracted AIDS and some have not. Sitting there with my wife, looking at her, thinking, my goodness, thank God it's not me anyway. I was under the impression that the haemophiliacs who had contracted, who had been given infected batches, had been informed.
Robert's two uncles and his cousin were also at the meeting.
Afterwards, we went for a cup of tea, and I asked them, I says, has any of you been told that you have got this? And they categorically says, no, thank God it's not me, no, we've not been told.
In all, 18 haemophiliacs had been infected with HIV from a single batch of factor VIII. Robert had no idea that he, his uncles and his cousin were amongst this group. He continued to take factor VIII, but was now more concerned.
Every time I went up to collect factor VIII, I would ask, is this product safe? Is it being checked? And all the time they kept on telling me yes, and there's no problem, Robert. Whilst all the time I was infected. They knew I was infected. I didn't know I was infected.
At 14 years old, John had also been given the same batch. His medical notes show his consultant, Dr. Ludlam, was testing him for signs of HIV, but neither John nor his parents were told.
I can remember them saying, do you want the results of your blood tests? And my response at the time, as a happy-go-lucky youngster, was, tell me if there's anything wrong. And their response was, all right, fine. And nothing was said.
Robert had been a fit man, but his health began to deteriorate. 3 years after his infection, Robert was sent an appointment by Dr. Ludlam.
Dr. Ludlam said that you've been infected with HIV.
What went through your mind at that point?
Horrified, terrified. Just shock.
And how much did you know about?
I knew it was deadly. I knew enough to know it was going to kill me. My main concern then was for my wife. And my son.
In early 1991, years after being given the infected batch, John went to hospital for a routine appointment. He was 20 years old.
Dr. Ludlam was there himself, which was, I do remember thinking, was unusual. He cleared his throat and said, it's come to my attention that, you've been infected with HIV. It's not what I was expecting. So that was, no chance of children, no chance of a future. From there it moved on to what happens now, and he said, because you have been infected for a number of years, I would imagine you'll be dead in 18 months.
Haemophiliacs had been given a deadly disease by the NHS. The blood transfusion service in Scotland supplied the blood products, and it worked closely with the doctors of the haemophilia centres, who have declined to be interviewed. So were the real risks known?
In terms of a known riskier product, you would have to balance the fact that in comparison with cryoprecipitate, it was seen as a life-transforming product for haemophilia patients at that time.
Factor VIII did carry a warning, but this was just for hepatitis and played down the risks. An Irish lawyer, Raymond Bradley, is one of the world's leading experts in the field of blood product safety and healthcare. 6 years ago, he was involved in an inquiry into how hundreds of people in Ireland became infected with hepatitis C and AIDS through blood products.
By 1982, it should have been appreciated that there was a significant risk of a serious illness that is now identified as AIDS that was also blood-borne. Tragically, in many countries there was a failure to act in respect of that particular risk.
One country that did act was the Netherlands. It warned patients and offered alternative treatment. Kees Smit was the head of the Dutch Haemophilia Society at the time.
It was absolutely known to the authorities in the United States and in Europe that there was a potential HIV problem. So the authorities should warn the medical community, and the medical community, and let's say in this case haemophilia blood transfusion services, should take all necessary measures.
In Scotland, haemophilia doctors and the blood transfusion service discussed the risks of HIV, but they decided not to put a warning with the product. They said it would cause patients unnecessary stress. Scotland did take some measures to reduce the risks. They decided to take blood just from donors in Scotland. But with no test for HIV or hepatitis C, the main safeguard was to choose them carefully. So who were the